All right, so I'm Ian Freeman. You may know me from Free Talk Live. You can hear the show that I do every night, 7 to 10, up in the media room, the LRN.FM media room. I'm here, and thanks to everybody for coming out. This is probably the largest group that we've ever had at one of these radio seminars, if you want to call it. Third year that I've been doing this here, talking about two main topics. One of them is two-way communications. You'll see a number of people walking around the campsite this week with these handheld two-way units or something that looks similar. And also to talk about broadcast communications like 24-hour FM broadcasting. So I'll just go over these two concepts briefly, open it up to questions. There's a microphone over here. In Keene, New Hampshire, where I live, we have a decent network of activists that have two-way radios, like the one I'm showing you here. It makes it really handy when you're doing activism to be able to communicate directly to your friends without having to go through some sort of intermediate communications network. So if I'm in the middle of, if I'm at City Hall and somebody's getting arrested and I want to get the word out quickly, the best way to do it is with a two-way radio. There's no more immediate method than that. I can pull out my cell phone, I can dial Porc 411, I can wait for Porc 411 to pick up, I can leave a message. After the message is left, it will then be sent out to email addresses, and within a few minutes, people are going to hear that message. That's not immediate enough if you need to get the word out about something. In Keene, we also have Keene 411, which is, again, I'm not ragging on Porc 411. I love Porc 411. It's a very, very useful service, and if you don't know about it, you should learn about it. But we also have Keene 411, which is a text messaging system. You can punch a text message into a certain phone number, and it gets blasted out within about, less than 10 seconds to everybody who subscribes to the Keene 411 Twitter through their cell phone. So people can get bounced a cell phone text message in about 10 or 12 seconds maximum from the time when you send it, unless the system's on the fritz, in which case it could be a couple days before they catch up. There's every now and then the Twitter mail system that we use gets backed up. They have technical difficulties. So again, that's just not immediate enough. It requires the time it takes to punch the text message in. It requires the time it takes the networks to send the text around, and then people to actually take the time to look at their phone and see what's going on. So if people have a two-way radio and they've got it turned on and on them, which is really the biggest challenge with these things, one, you got to get them in activists' hands, meaning they have to purchase one. Then they have to actually charge it and bring it places. Take it with you when you're going out and about. If you don't have it with you, then no one can reach you on it, and it's pretty inconvenient. But if people have them and they use them, as tends to happen pretty effectively in Keene, it can be a game changer when it comes to being on the ground doing some kind of activism. Let's say, for instance, the Rich Paul trial. You may recall there was an agent there, Agent Christiana, who has been investigating the Free State Project for a number of years. And he was one of the people who was testifying at the trial. And so Ademo and Pete and Garrett and myself, we all had the two-way radios. And we were able to easily cover all the exits to the building and be able to communicate with one another as to, what's going on. Oh, he's coming out the front. Oh, okay, can go around to the front side and have more people there. But that way they can't sneak out in any way, shape, or form. And again, you've got that instant communication. As soon as you press the button, the other person is able to hear what you have to say, presuming they're paying attention. So that's kind of the purpose of the two-way radio system. The ones that we're using here are the Baofeng UV5R. It's a cheap Chinese-made radio that you can get from me for $50. I'm actually having problems with my programming cable at the moment, so I've got a few things I need to work out before I can actually sell these, but I just got a batch of them in today. They work really well. They are 4-watt output. They're dual band, meaning they're UHF and VHF. You can dual watch, meaning you can listen to two channels at the same time. So on my personal one here, I've got the PorcFest CB channel, which is kind of like the all-call channel here. And I'm also monitoring the security channel here at PorcFest. So I can do them both at the same time or one or the other. Anyway, they're very, very configurable, and they work really well. And they're cheap. So you can get, this radio has a feature set that you'd pay $300 for, in an American-made radio. So they're so affordable. You know, if you break, you drop it, it falls into a toilet. It doesn't matter. So that's nice. So that's kind of the basics of why two-way is important for activism. And the more people that have the two-ways, the more people that use them, the more effective they become. In fact, you can even install them in your car. This unit here is a Yaesu FT2900. We tend to use Marine Band for our communications around here. And is a radio that can be easily modified to work on Marine Band. Anyway, it's basically a ham radio. And it's got something like 65 or 70 watts as compared to the 4 watts that you have. I think my mic's having an issue. I'm not sure if it's a signal problem or what. It's kind of ducking in and out. So anyway, it's got quite a bit more wattage. You have to have better antennas, like a large mobile style antenna. I've got one on the back of my the car that I drive, and wherever I am, I've got my handheld with me. If I'm in the car, I've got that with me. And of course, home, there are ways to do, home setups. You can take one of these, hook it up to a power converter. In fact, some people are working on kind of a network between towns, and I don't know what the status of that is. I think it's kind of experimental at the moment, where somebody will set up a base station version of this, hooked up to a large antenna, maybe like, a 16-foot antenna up on the roof or something like that. And you can then talk for a fairly large distance. So with two-way communications, it can really increase the ability to do effective activism. Another form of effective activism on its own is broadcast 24/7 on FM. Is there another microphone I could try out? Just curious. This one seems to be ducking in and out quite a bit. So anyway, broadcasting on FM 24 hours a day, it's a lot more risky than using a two-way radio. Like, as far as the FCC coming after you, that's one of the big concerns why people won't actually do broadcasting. Thank you. Check. All right, so broadcasting. So there's a risk involved. The FCC could raid your home. That's a very real possibility. It happens. They'll take your stuff, and they're probably not going to ever give it back. They're going to charge you with a $10,000 forfeiture or something like that. And if you don't pay, then from what I understand, they have to send it to the Justice Department for prosecution in civil court in order to try to extract money from you. Now, rumor has it, and I don't know if it's true, but rumor has it the FCC's never done that. That they've issued fines to pirate radio broadcasters, and they've never actually sent a single one of them to court. Because, most people will pay the bill when the government sends them a ticket, when the government sends you a fine. Most people just pay it. They want to make it go away. So I think most of the pirate radio operators, they probably pay some of it, or they get on a payment plan. So when the operator doesn't pay, if they want to try to get money, they have to send it to prosecution. And the rumor is they won't do it because then it could open them up to having their regulations overturned as unconstitutional, prohibitions on free speech. Because shouldn't you be able to buy a piece of hardware like this? This is a 30-watt Chinese-made FM transmitter. This, $450, $500. An antenna is going to cost you $100, a little bit of cabling, and you're on the air. I mean, you can be on the radio in your town covering the whole city, if it's a relatively small place, for less than $1,000. If you want to get a really nice transmitter, you could pay $2,000 for a really nice transmitter. Just keep in mind that it could all be stolen at some point by FCC agents. So the risk is that, your stuff gets taken, the police come and raid your home. That's a pretty significant risk. But whenever there's risk, usually there's a potential for reward. And the reward in the case of FM broadcast is people will hear the message. So lots of people still listen to the radio. I know we live in the internet age and everybody's got their smartphones, and lots of people listen to music and things like that on smartphones. But the numbers of Americans who listen to broadcast radio are very, very large. I mean, it's in the 90-something percentile on a weekly basis that, people are listening. And so when you start putting liberty-oriented programming on the air where you live, word's going to get around. You don't have to do any marketing. You just put the signal out there, and people will start to tell other people about the good shows they're listening to. We've had a station on in Keene, New Hampshire, where I live, for off and on over a period of several years, since about 2009. There have been 3 iterations so far. They've operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for many months. The longest run was 9 months. There was another one for 8 months, and another one lasted about 4. And basically, they'll last as long as it takes for the FCC to receive a complaint, because they don't listen actively. They only have offices in certain big cities. So the closest one to New Hampshire is Boston. They're not monitoring any communications there. They only respond to complaints. A lot of times the complaints are going to come in from the existing broadcasters in the area, the ones who are licensed, the ones who have taken the time to bend over and jump through the hoops and do what they're told and pay the licensing fees and all that nonsense. So they're the ones that are most likely to complain about it. Secondly, there's also the people that hate activism. They hate the liberty community, the people who are the critics, the statists, if you will. These are also the people who are likely and willing to snitch you out. So all that said, the experience has been that those 3 radio stations that I told you about, no one was ever raided. What has happened to stop the stations from operating is the FCC will usually issue you a threat. They will send you a threatening letter. They will leave you a notice. It's called a notice of apparent liability. And that is basically them saying, well, we believe that you, Mr. Homeowner or Mr. Renter, are the operator of this facility at this frequency, and we would like to inspect your equipment, or you need to cease operating immediately. And usually if you cease operating immediately, they go away and leave you alone. So no one has been raided, and there has been liberty-oriented audio on the air for people to listen to. I program LRN.FM. You might have noticed we have several radio shows. The Angel Clark Show today starts at 5 upstairs. So I program the feed. You don't even have to program the station if you don't want to. If you do want to, by all means. But if you just want to, you can plug and play. You can grab a box like this. This is the Barracks in-streamer, or the X-streamer. No, it's the X-streamer. So Barracks, this is like a $200 piece of equipment. And basically, it's a little computer that runs Linux, and it runs audio streaming software. And that's all it does. So it's just like a rock-solid audio streaming device. If you provide this with good internet, it will provide you with a good signal 24 hours a day from my internet feed, or from any internet feed. You can set this thing up to where it actually can fall back. So if you are streaming LRN.FM and something happens to one of our streams, you can set it up to have a fallback stream, actually a second and third fallback stream. In fact, it can even run off of USB. There's a little USB stick in here that has MP3 files on it. So if for whatever reason my 3 streams that I'm telling it I want to program from fail, let's say I've got a total internet outage, it'll then fall back to the USB drive, and then I can play, MP3s of Liberty audiobooks, things like that. So this little box will provide 24 hours a day of content, and it's very, very reliable. LRN also has a satellite feed, which you can receive, and you can rebroadcast that as well. So the signal's there, the feed is there. We could just use more people operating radio stations. People listen. When the station went off the air in Keene, we started hearing, activists in the area started hearing from people. I don't know, how many of you are familiar with Judge Burke? Judge Burke in Keene? A few people, you've heard of Judge Burke. So Judge Burke apparently goes to the YMCA and he works out after work, and Mark Edge, my co-host, was there working out. And I guess Burke said something to Mark about, hey, what happened to the radio station? So he was listening to the radio station. You never know who's going to tune in. And people talk, I mean, especially in a place like Keene, New Hampshire, where there isn't really a lot of local radio anyway. Yeah, you might be able to get some stations in from Boston, maybe. There's a few local stations. There's not a lot of choice. And so you can create that choice in your marketplace. You can broadcast great shows like Flaming Freedom. I see we have one of the hosts of Flaming Freedom in here. So there's a show out of Manchester. There's shows out of Keene. Whether it's in New Hampshire where you want to do this broadcasting, or anywhere around the world, it's something you can do that reaches potentially thousands of people in your area with these ideas. So it's pretty powerful stuff. And I would say low risk. Even though, yes, you could be raided, it's not likely to happen right out of the gate. So if you had a few different locations, let's say you live in New Hampshire where there's a lot of activists around who have different houses in which they live, then you can just move the setup. The FCC threatens, if the FCC threatens one operator, you move it to the next location after that. And then it might take them another 5 months to respond to you. Worst case scenario, they actually do raid your house and they do take your stuff. Well, nobody wants that to happen. But for the cost that you'd pay to get one of these stations on the air, let's say $1,000 to $2,000, that's nothing. I mean, if you think about what it might cost to actually run a radio station, go and look at, for instance, the FCC's filing fees. If you'd like to apply to run your own FM broadcast radio station, first of all, you may not be able to apply because they may not have an application window open. So, in fact, most of the time they don't. So most of the time you can't even apply for your own radio station. If you wanted to do it legitimately, the easiest way to do it is to buy an existing station. And that's, of course, most of the time those aren't for sale. And they're very, very expensive. What are you going to pay for a radio station and the facilities there? Even if you were just operating a station and renting tower space somewhere, you'd probably pay hundreds of dollars per month for that. So to lose $1,000 worth of equipment after nine months worth of 24-hour broadcasting wouldn't be a terrible investment in Liberty Outreach. So it's very low cost when you average it out over time. Even if you do lose the equipment, which again hasn't happened, 5 years in Keene, and the equipment's still there. So that's kind of a brief overview. You got the two-way communications. They really help activists on the ground getting things done. You got the broadcast radio, which is an outreach tool to people who've not heard these ideas before. People who are unfamiliar with our ideas. We literally can put a feed into their lives, into their cars, when they're going to work, when they're coming home, when they're at work, and help change people's minds about the ideas of freedom. All of these are relatively low cost, but they do require some investment. Technical know-how is a plus, but it's not a particularly complicated thing to get these things rolling. A little bit of research would help. Like, for instance, when you're dealing with broadcast radio, it's completely different from two-way. With two-way, you're only transmitting every now and then. A very fraction of the time that you hold one of these, you're only ever transmitting occasionally. With these, you're going 24/7. So there's more, subtleties you have to kind of be aware of, like SWR, standing wave ratio, which is something that is a rating of how much of the power you're transmitting is actually being reflected back into the transmitter. It's creating an inefficiency, and it could actually damage the transmitter. So there's a level of learning curve involved, especially with this. It's not hard to just grab a radio like this, pick it up, and start using it. There's not as much of a learning curve here. But I've got some resources. So if you're interested in learning about broadcast FM transmission, please visit broadcast.lrn.fm or just go to lrn.fm and click the broadcast tab. And I've written up a very lengthy piece there with photos, links to equipment that you can buy, specific suggestions for good transmitters and equipment. This transmitter, not that great. It doesn't have really good audio connectors on the back of it, but it's also not terrible. And as I said, it was about $500. There's a nice one made by a company called Ramsey Electronics. It's a PX50. That's about a $2,000 transmitter. It's 50 watts. 50 watts will easily cover probably Manchester. It definitely covers Keene, no problem. You can even cut the wattage in half to 25 and still get good coverage with it. So, take a little bit of time, learn about this stuff. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has about broadcast FM, as well as two-way communications. We've successfully set up a two-way network in Keene, which involves a repeater, which helps us get our signal all around the city. Because when you're doing two-way communications, usually it's kind of a line-of-sight thing where, this radio, it does broadcast on FM, UHF and VHF, and ideally, there should be a line of sight to the antenna you're trying to reach. So having a repeater means that you set a antenna way up at a certain height, and then more of the people with the handhelds can see that antenna, so to speak. They can speak to that, and then the repeater can bounce that signal back and at a greater power. So like I said before, this is like 10 times the wattage. It just makes it so signals are more signals are able to be collected and therefore rebroadcast and heard by all the people who are on that network. So repeater communication is a little bit more advanced. It's certainly possible to do, and again, relatively low cost. We're talking about hundreds of dollars here, $1,000 maybe maximum. So that's kind of a brief overview of the two technologies. Feel free to ask any questions that you might have here, and I'm happy to field them on whatever issues or concerns or questions you have. Jay Noon.
I'll just Can
we turn him up?
Check.
Thank you.
Check. All right. Question I got for you is your repeater. I was going to ask you about if you had one. What frequency are you running that on?
That's not something that's necessary to really put out there publicly, but it is.
Okay.
It is a marine band range frequency. That's where we've been in Keene for a long time.
So the marine stuff's all the 440 band.
No, marine band is around 156 megahertz. So it's a VHF frequency. It's been the choice of PorcFest. So the PorcFest has a security channel. It's got Free Aid has a channel. These are all marine band-based channels. Technically, it's actually illegal, as I understand it, from FCC regulations to broadcast on marine band. But again, they would have to know where you are in order to catch you broadcasting on marine band, and they'd have to prove that it was you. And it's a lot easier for them to catch a 24-hour-a-day FM signal than it is somebody walking around a campsite with one of these things. Again, we've been using these for years up here at PorcFest and in Keene. And there's never been an issue with two-way communications with the FCC.
I actually use the 2-meter ham frequencies all the time. And I got some buddies that are, I call them hammerheads, ham radio guys, and they do this thing called fox hunts. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Is that where they set up a transmitter in a secret location?
Right. They'll set up a transmitter, and then they'll run around and they'll set up Doppler 2-meter to trace the signal, and they'll find it. And they do these fox hunting all the time, and that's how I actually learned about two-way radio. Was one of my closest friends was a big-time ham radio guy, and he had. I mean, it's pretty cool. We do like repeater links and all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
But anyways,
did you ever ask the government's permission to do any of that stuff?
Oh, me, no. But talking about getting raided, he got raided, my friend.
Really?
Yeah.
For running a repeater?
For running a repeater. In fact, you know who he is. He's passed away. His name's Russ Brown.
Okay.
He's been up here several times. And anyways, not running a repeater, what had happened is in Munson, Mass, a police officer basically murdered an innocent man, totally got away with it. So Russ didn't do this. Another guy did this. And you know him also. I'm not going to say his name. But so anyways, got on. Basically, we opened up a radio, got on a police frequency, and we started broadcasting directly on the police frequency that
Wow, I wouldn't recommend doing that. That's definitely a way to bring attention to yourself.
So this guy did this. And about this murder of this man. So they started doing their investigation on who did it. And what they did is they profiled a licensed ham radio operator who didn't even do this stuff. And they went in his house and they raided it. And he went to court and he actually confessed and he didn't even do it. But I helped him out a lot with this guy who was charged with this stuff. And he stood up, didn't take the plea deal, and eventually got all his stuff back, all his radios back, and everything was dismissed. And it wasn't even him, even though he did confess because they threatened to take his house and the whole 9 yards. But the FCC is only going to go after licensed FCC operators because it's the only one they have jurisdiction after. And I'm pretty sure they know who the other guy is that did it, but they can't go after him. In fact, they even told him the reason they picked him out is because he fit the profile of being anti-government and having a ham radio license. And they only had jurisdiction over ham radio license operators.
Thanks, Jay.
So
appreciate it. Next up.
That fox hunt thing, my friends and I used to do that with CB radios, go and hide and then track them down through
Can everybody hear him back there? You guys, can you hear him? We can't hear. Can we get some more levels on this mic, please? Thank you.
I could speak closer.
If you speak closer, that also helps, and try to be as loud as you can. My
question actually is something that came to mind, talking about the differences between the two. the FCC uses the emergency broadcast system. Is there a possibility or a way of doing a sort of emergency broadcast system to transmit what comes over the two-way radios onto an FM broadcast?
Yeah, you could totally put two-way transmissions on FM. In fact, one of the ideas that I've had in the past, and it's hard to find people willing to do broadcast FM, so it hasn't really happened. But it would be to take the police and put them on FM. Take their two-way communications, because you wouldn't want to put activist communications on FM. But to put the police scanner on FM is an easy matter. All you need is the feed for the audio and the equipment to transmit it, and then you just put it on the air, and then people would be able to drive around and listen to the police chatter on their car radios. I mean, you want to talk about a public service, I think that's a great idea. And please, feel free to take that and run with it wherever you happen to live. But yeah, that's certainly possible. Next up.
Mine isn't so much a question as just a general warning to people. Sometimes you can get interference with legitimate emergency frequencies like EMS or fire. So just be careful what frequencies you look for, what you end up using, because
Yeah, so what he's bringing up is that the FCC has certain frequency ranges that are reserved for certain things. So whether it's EMS or fire or the military or police or whatever, there's different frequencies out there that have been sort of preset as, well, this is where we're going to license police agencies between this range and this range. So it's important to be choosy about which channel you're going to operate on. The nice things about the Baofeng radios is they're completely programmable. You can use any frequency you want to, in which case you do need to be careful and realize, are you stepping on somebody else's toes? If you don't want to be bothered by the FCC, don't step on anyone else's toes. That's probably the best suggestion. So research the potential frequencies you want to use, learn about what you're looking at doing, and you should be fine.
My question is, have you done anything with data transmission as well as just voice?
What was the end of the question? Data transmission? What?
Data transmission, like say if you had a smartphone or some other device and you wanted to not go through the internet and you just wanted to go over the air.
I don't know if Steve Z wants to come up and answer a question about data transmission. He's kind of more of an expert on the technical side of things. That's never been tried that I know of. Maybe there are some activists who are working on that. It's also my understanding, and Steve can correct me if I'm wrong here, that the data transmission capabilities of two-way radios are very, very low. They're very poor. You're not going to get any significant traffic there.
Yeah. Radios like the Baofeng or just regular FM transmitters were not designed for a whole lot of spectrum. It's basically just enough to carry an analog voice signal and not much more. So in the ham radio world, the marine band that Ian uses is near what the ham radio operators call the 2-meter band, and most data transmissions on ham radio are limited to 1200 baud, which is really slow text speed. So now there are funny things like in the ham, a lot of regular wireless routers and stuff actually operate on ham radio frequencies where ham radio operators get priority and they can run a lot more power than you normally would on a regular Wi-Fi router. So if you were like a licensed ham radio operator, you can go and get 25-watt amplifiers and have Wi-Fi links really far and stuff like that. But not a whole lot of ham radio operators do that. So.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. If you've got really technical questions, Steve is the guy. He's way more of an engineer-minded person. He knows the engineering side of radio. I don't know all the theory. I don't know exactly how all the transmission types work, but I know I know enough to make things work. I know enough to put the boxes together and cable them correctly. I know about SWR. So there's a learning curve. You don't have to go crazy and know everything technically to make this stuff work. Questions? Go ahead.
So I hope this isn't too technical, but around us, a lot of the police scanners are getting encrypted. And I guess with these regular scanners and stuff, it's really hard to pick up. You can hear some of their transmissions and stuff, but a lot of the stuff like cop to cop, you really can't even get. And kind of brought up in my mind when you're talking about putting on FM. That's really interesting. But I'm wondering if anybody's actually working on how to receive those conversations that the cops are actually having amongst themselves that may not be broadcasted on the actual scanners.
Okay, so good question. We're talking about police scanners, which is a fine category to discuss. In Keene, we have the Keene Police Scanner. You can go to freekeene.com under the radio tab, and you can find it there. But basically what we're doing there is we're using a P25 decoding system. There's certain scanners can decode the Motorola APCO 25 system is what it's called. And so in Keene, we don't have a problem hearing what the police are saying on their channel because we can decrypt that. The scanner that you need is probably going to be a $400 unit, though. So it's something I bought years ago, and it's been pretty good. So since then, I mean, we've created the scanner feed. It's there. It's on anyone's smartphone. You can, if you have the TuneIn app on your smartphone, you can actually look for Keene Police Scanner, and you can tune in to hear what's going on there. However, you still won't be able to hear everything because the police have other means of communicating. So sometimes you'll hear the police say something like, "Call me." They know they can be monitored, so they'll have their really sensitive communications either via cell phone or via their sort of inter-vehicle, inter-operational text system that they have. You know, you've seen them on their laptops in their cars. They can send messages to dispatch and presumably other officers that way as well. So it would be interesting, and I don't know if anyone's ever done this, but it'd be interesting to do a 91A request in New Hampshire, which is a Freedom of Information Act request, to try to request the logs of what they've been saying to one another. You know, because we record the scanner, or we can record the scanner feed, but we don't know what they're saying in their other
They lost
methods.
those anyway.
What's that?
They lost those anyway.
The logs, sure,
Yeah,
sure. So I hope did that answer your question?
Yeah.
So yeah, the answer is, first of all, most of the police departments in New Hampshire don't have this encoding technology. Most of the small towns, they don't have the grants from the federal government that they need usually to pay for these systems. These are very expensive systems, the Motorola systems, the radios, all the equipment's very expensive. So most of the departments don't have it. Most of them, you'll be able to use a regular scanner and listen into what they're saying. Larger markets like Keene, Manchester, they're going to have the Motorola encryption. But in that case, that scanner solves that problem. So in that case, you want to look for Motorola APCO 25, APCO 25, to kind of learn about how to do that.
I had kind of maybe one or it's kind of two questions in one, but maybe I'll just say that I think that this would be a good radio to have in a time of if the shit were to hit the fan, so to speak, that it would be good to have the radio that you have. But just ask about NSA monitoring. Do they monitor every frequency there is, and would they pick up in like the Liberty radio network as well too, if they knew about it?
So NSA monitoring and emergency communications. I would presume the NSA is better at monitoring radio than the FCC is, but I don't know how good they are at monitoring different areas or whatever. These radios are unencrypted, so anybody that talks on these can be heard by anyone with a scanner. So keep that in mind. You don't want to reveal any sensitive information over these units. You never know who could be listening. Emergency communications, yes, these things are really useful in emergency communications. A lot of times in an emergency, cell phone networks might be down entirely. They may actually be bogged down. If they're still up, they may be swamped with people trying to make phone calls, and that may result in failed attempts at communicating. But with these, it doesn't require a network to operate. As long as you are within range of one of the other receivers, you will be able to reach that person. And that's why I also say that you've got the higher power mobile rigs. These are going to go much further than these are. So there's a lot of good use for this as far as organizing people in an emergency, for sure.
Okay. Well, the main part of the question was about the NSA. Do they actually have a blanket monitoring of every frequency that people can transmit on?
I can't answer that question. I don't know what the NSA has. And if you're worried about what the NSA is, possibly going to hear, then you shouldn't say those things on the radio, would be my recommendation. There's no encryption. You can find radios with encryption. And if they're a cheap radio like this that has a feature like that, they're easily breakable. Even the APCO 25 system I was talking about with the police, if you pay for the expensive scanner, you can hear what they're saying too. So to me, it doesn't matter if the NSA is listening. I don't have anything, I'm not planning violence. I am not, dealing drugs over a two-way radio. So all they're going to hear me is talking about where the police are and what the activists are doing, and I'm not really concerned about it.
Okay, thanks for answering the question.
Yep, no problem. Before we get to you, were there anybody else who wanted to ask a question for the first time? Any first-time questions? All right, feel free.
Have I been asking too many lately?
Oh, no, you just came up once before. I just wanted to give other people a chance to get
because I've been at a lot of tents and asking a lot of questions.
Go ahead.
I was basically, you half answered it already, but what kind of encryptions are available for those handhelds? What exactly can you get? How does it work?
Some of these little handheld radios, the Baofeng doesn't offer any encryption options at all. There are some like handheld units you can buy from Walmart. You've probably seen the blister packs, as they're called, with the plastic wrapped around them, and they're really hard to cut into, they're a big pain. When you buy those radios, you're usually getting FRS or GMRS radios. Those are the radio bands that the units operate on. Some of those units will have encryption, but it's a joke. I mean, if you've got one of the radios, you'll be able to listen to the other person. So anyone with that brand of radio would be able to de-encrypt the channel. Or, you're only selecting between 1 and 8 possible encryption modes. So it's not hard to just randomly choose and find one that'll decode it. So the answer is no, there aren't really any viable encryption options that I'm aware of, at least not at an affordable price. If you want to pay a lot of money for each handheld unit and try to get your own Motorola system, you'd be safer, but there can still be people with the right equipment who can decode it. So to me, it's a futile sort of process to try to even bother with that. Just don't put it out there if you don't want it to be heard. So what he said was, would code words be simpler? I'm repeating for the cameras. Would code words be simpler? Sure. I mean, if you have, if there's something you have to say, but you can't say it, then I suppose you could use code if that's something you wanted to do. But again, it's hard enough to just get people to carry the radios and have the radios. To get them to learn a code system, you're going to be asking a lot of other activists. So broadcast communications, two-way communications, they both work very, very well. If you put them to use, they'll make your activism movement all the stronger, the better. I think that the two ways are the most important thing for activists on the ground, and broadcast FM, of course, very helpful to reach out to people and connect them to the ideas of liberty. So again, I'm here. I've got some level of expertise with these topics. Feel free to ask any questions you might have, even if you don't want to ask them in front of everyone. I'll be hanging out for a little bit here. Actually, I want to try to program some of these radios, give you a little bit more information about these. By default, they don't come with any programming in them, but there's a cable that you can use to connect to the radio via your USB port on your laptop, and you can flash memories into it. You can have a pre-programmed set of memory entries and just flash it up to the radio. So that's what I'm going to be trying to do here as soon as I get off the stage. I've been having some technical difficulties with that, but that's more of a problem, not with the radio, but a problem with the cable that I have. So, any other questions? Yeah, come on up. Feel free.
Just an extrapolation on the emergency broadcast system that I was asking about earlier. Obviously, you don't want to put all of the activities of the activists on FM, but say there was an event where you wanted to get the signal out to as many people as possible as to what was occurring at the moment. Is there a way to create an emergency broadcast system that would break into an existing program that's being transmitted from the two-way?
Okay, so I see what you're saying. The question is, let's say we've got a 24-hour radio station, it's operating. How could someone break into that with emergency communications? With something urgent, yeah. There may be ways to automate that. They would likely be fairly expensive and convoluted, Another way to do it would be to, if you had your transmitter and then you had an audio source, like what I told you earlier was this thing can provide a 24-hour feed, but it doesn't give you anything more than that. There's no ability to break in or do anything like that. But if you were to take this and then link it into a mixer, and then this thing's running all the time, and the mixer's got a microphone attached to it or some other source of audio attached to it, then if there was some kind of an emergency, you could physically turn down the feed, turn up your microphone, or turn up your computer, or some other feed that has the scanner or whatever it is that you want. There are ways to automate this, but again, we're talking about some complicated measures. The easiest way would be to physically do it as a human. Automation systems are expensive, and how you would get the break-in factor, I don't know. There's probably some way of doing it. With FCC radio stations, they have what's called the NDEC. It's an FCC-mandated piece of hardware that each station has to have. It monitors a certain frequency that's operated by another station when it detects the tones that are necessary to send off the emergency broadcast. Yeah, so what happens is it hears that broadcast on a different frequency from another station in the region. It then records that broadcast, and then it's set up in the audio chain. And the audio chain is, you got your board, you got your transmitter. There's a certain path that the audio follows. So the NDEC is right before the transmitter. So the NDEC can take over whatever's happening on the air. It doesn't matter which microphones are turned on, what the sources are playing. The NDEC's right before the transmitter, so when it cuts in, it literally does cut in onto the air and plays that message. So you can't just go and buy an NDEC and set that system up for yourself. So the answer is maybe, and I don't know where you would start to look for something like that. Just get a board and pot it up and get on your mic and talk to people about what's happening.
I had an idea. I don't know if I'm just talking out my butt here or if I might actually be onto something. I'm not familiar enough with it. But basically, would it be possible to record like a test of, I'm assuming that the tone is like kind of similar to like a fax machine signal from what you just described. So basically that forces it to cut in. So would it be possible to record that from a radio of a test and then use that to break into the system?
No. Unless you have the proper equipment, those tones aren't going to do you any good. So if you don't have an NDEC machine and you're not a licensed radio station, that's not even an option for you. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear with that earlier. You'd have to, if you wanted to break into a signal, you would have to design your own system from scratch that I know of. And I'm no expert on that. So feel free to do the research on your own, see what you can dig up. Any other questions about two-way communications? As an activist, what are the options? How can they be useful? What are your experiences? Have you tried this where you are? Or again, broadcast two-way? If not, I can wrap up the discussion and get back to work. All right, well, thank you. And again, I'll be here. I'm going to work on some radio programming stuff, so if there's a question you think of later, feel free to approach me. Also, Steve Z's still hanging out here as well, and he is a technical wizard, usually happy to help with questions. Thank you.